An orphan girl sang in a restaurant to pay for her grandfather's surgery. But when she took the stage, unfortunately, the late afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Emma and Mr. Harold's small home, softly illuminating the old furniture and the portraits on the walls. To Emma, that light symbolized how, despite its simplicity, her home was always welcoming and filled with life. They lived on the outskirts of the city in a modest house with no luxuries, but overflowing with love and memories. Every corner seemed to whisper stories of her grandfather, old objects, a dusty guitar, and family photos from years gone by. Emma's life, though simple, was deeply meaningful. As long as she could remember, her grandfather, Mr. Harold, had been her one constant. A man with a warm gaze, though sometimes melancholic, who always managed to lift her spirits with stories of his youth. Mr. Harold had taught her to value small moments and see beauty in everyday life, a lesson Emma had deeply internalized. Despite his age and increasingly fragile health, Harold remained her guide, her protector, and above all, her best friend. Emma's routine revolved around her grandfather and household chores. She cooked with him, read old novels they found at the city market, and on days when he had the strength, Mr. Harold would recount tales of his youth when he had dreamed of a career in music. Those afternoons were special, his voice softened, as if his memories brought a mix of joy and nostalgia. Emma listened intently, feeling that somewhere in his stories lay the mystery of her own dreams. From a young age, Emma discovered her gift for music. Her voice was gentle, sweet, but carried a power that moved anyone who heard it. Her grandfather believed that music was an invisible bond connecting people and encouraged her to sing with love and respect. Although Emma had never taken formal lessons, her voice flowed naturally, as if it was something she had inherited, a legacy beyond words. In his granddaughter, Mr. Harold saw a spark, a passion reminiscent of his own dreams, which life had swept away. Whenever Emma sang, he felt the presence of his late wife, who had shared his love for music. One day, while preparing breakfast, Mr. Harold began to cough intensely. Emma was alarmed, and although he tried to reassure her with a smile, she saw the exhaustion he was hiding. Despite his frail health, Harold had always avoided the doctor, perhaps out of fear or to keep Emma from worrying. But that day, her insistence won, and they went to a nearby clinic. The wait in the doctor's office was long and nerve-wracking. Emma watched her grandfather in silence, finding comfort in his gaze despite the worry in his eyes. Finally, the doctor saw them, and after a thorough examination, he gave Mr. Harold news that changed everything. The illness he had ignored for months was more serious than he imagined, requiring urgent surgery and prolonged, costly treatment. Emma felt her world pause. Her eyes filled with anguish, but she tried to stay strong, especially as her grandfather struggled to remain optimistic. Harold, always so protective, downplayed the diagnosis, switching topics to lighter matters on the way home. But Emma understood. This couldn't be ignored, and the thought of losing him was more than she could bear. That night, as silence enveloped the house, Emma stayed awake, contemplating what she could do. She thought of the sacrifices her grandfather had made for her and everything he had taught her. Her thoughts drifted to the times he'd said music was her gift, something to cherish. Then, almost like an epiphany, she realized her voice might be the key to saving him. Determined to do whatever was necessary, Emma decided that music wouldn't just be a hobby or refuge. It would be her way of caring for her grandfather, just as he had cared for her. With a firm heart and a mix of nerves and hope, Emma went to Henry Restaurant, her grandfather's old friend. She recalled seeing him at family gatherings during her childhood, though his face now seemed barely familiar. However, she knew if anyone would give her the chance to sing and help her grandfather, it was him. Henry Restaurant wasn't luxurious. It was a cozy spot adorned with black and white photos of musicians from past eras and a small stage where local artists performed at night. It was a space that breathed music, a corner where anyone could be heard, regardless of talent or fragile dreams. Henry, always ready to support young artists, remembered the value of those chasing dreams, for he had once done the same. When Emma arrived and explained her situation, Henry listened intently. He saw the determination in her words and the bravery in her eyes, sensing she was fighting for something bigger than herself. Harold's story and his delicate health moved Henry, and after a brief pause, he decided to give her the chance to sing at his restaurant. That very night, Emma would go on stage. Though her nerves were overwhelming, she was determined not to fail. The restaurant gradually filled, and the buzz of conversations filled the space as tables were taken by locals and regulars. Behind the scenes, Emma prepared for her first performance in front of an audience. She felt the weight of strangers' eyes and the quickening beat of her heart. At that moment, her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. "Music is a gift, Emma. Sing to life, to stories, and you'll always sing from the heart." She took a deep breath, and with that final image of her grandfather, she stepped onto the stage. When she began to sing, her voice filled the restaurant. At first it was soft, almost a whisper, but it grew stronger and more expressive. Her voice, gentle yet powerful, captured the attention of everyone in the room. It was as if each note carried her story, her love for her grandfather, and her fear of losing him. When the song ended, the restaurant fell silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Emma smiled, relieved and grateful. That first performance felt like a small victory. However, not everyone shared her joy. In the back of the room, Luke, a boy her age, watched with a tense expression. Luke had been singing in the restaurant for months to help his ill mother, and every tip was crucial. His attitude was challenging, almost sullen, and his voice, in contrast to Emma's, was intense, filled with raw emotion. For him, Emma's arrival wasn't inspiring, it was a threat. Seeing her on stage, receiving attention and applause, stirred a mix of distrust and rivalry in him. After her performance, Emma collected the few coins the audience had left in the tip jar, noticing some emotional patrons who had even left words of encouragement on small slips of paper. But when she looked up, she met Luke's cold stare, watching her with distrust and resentment. "Nice performance," he said, without a hint of warmth. "Hope you don't get too used to all the attention." Confused by his attitude, Emma tried to respond, but Luke didn't give her a chance. He headed straight for the stage, taking his guitar with a determined stride and beginning his own performance. Unlike Emma, Luke exuded an intense, defiant energy. His voice, though different, also resonated powerfully in the restaurant, drawing the audience in with a raw, direct intensity. The audience, captivated by his strength, was absorbed in his performance, and Emma, watching from a distance, felt a mix of admiration and unease. That night, Emma understood her path would not be easy. What was a hopeful opportunity for her at the restaurant was also Luke's lifeline. The competition between them was clear. Each night, each song, each tip meant more than just a performance. For Emma, it was an act of love for her grandfather. For Luke, it was survival, a way to care for his mother and keep his home afloat. Over time, each performance became a silent battle between them, a stage where rivalry began to weave itself without the need for words. Luke saw Emma as an obstacle that threatened to cut into his earnings, while she struggled to understand the hostility from her stage partner. Henry, watching from the bar, observed the two young people's journeys. He knew that while their paths seemed distinct, their struggles and motives were more alike than either would admit. At the end of the night, Emma went home with a mix of emotions. She felt proud of her first performance, but Luke's rejection left her with a bitter taste. She remembered her grandfather's warm gaze as he wished her luck before her show, and decided not to let herself be discouraged. Despite the obstacles, she knew she was on the right path. Music, that connection she had shared with her grandfather since she was a child, was now her only hope. At that moment, Emma couldn't foresee how her fate, intertwined with Luke's, would lead her to confront not only her past, but also to uncover strengths and connections that would change her life forever. The days went by quickly, and Emma became a constant presence at Henry's restaurant. Each night, she took the small stage, her soft, melodic voice reaching straight to the heart of the audience. Regular customers began to recognize her, and although the crowd remained small, someone was always touched by her singing, leaving a tip or a note of encouragement. However, Emma's happiness at finding a place where her talent was welcomed wasn't shared by everyone. Luke, who had been a steady presence at the restaurant for months, viewed each of Emma's performances as a direct threat. For him, singing there wasn't a path to fulfill dreams or express his art. It was a necessity, a way to bring income home for his mother's medical treatment. His challenging, almost gruff demeanor contrasted with the sweetness and hope Emma projected. To him, she wasn't just competition, but someone who, without meaning to, risked his only source of income. Every night after her performance, Emma would collect the coins left by the audience, feeling grateful. But as she left the stage, she often noticed Luke's fixed, challenging gaze as he impatiently awaited his turn. It was as if both knew that beyond sharing the space, they were engaged in a sort of silent competition, a struggle for the audience's attention and applause. Emma tried to stay focused on her goal, but the tension Luke projected was hard to ignore. One night, after Emma finished her song, Luke took the stage and began singing without even glancing at her. His performance was intense, almost violent in its energy, and the audience was captivated by the power of his voice. The contrast with Emma's sweetness left the audience divided, some preferring her warmth and hope, others drawn to Luke's raw intensity. Each found in their music a way to express their emotions and pain. For Emma, music was a refuge of love. For Luke, it was a fight and an escape. Sometimes Luke would encounter her backstage, where he wouldn't hesitate to show his disdain. "You don't have to come every night," he once said coldly, barely looking at her. "I only need a couple of nights a week to do my part." Though hurt, Emma chose to ignore him. She felt that even if Luke didn't understand her situation, she couldn't let his words affect her. She remembered her grandfather and the reason she was there. Mr. Harold's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that even when obstacles appeared, music should remain a refuge. So, with that conviction, she climbed onto the stage each night, intending for every song to be a tribute to her grandfather. The rivalry between them continued to grow. Luke, with his challenging attitude and sharp remarks, made Emma uncomfortable, though she didn't fully understand the source of his resentment. Why did someone who shared the same passion treat her with such contempt? Nights at the restaurant became an emotional battleground where each performance seemed like a way to measure their strength, as if both were trying to win over an audience that had begun to sense the tension between them. From the bar, Henry watched with curiosity and some concern. He knew the backgrounds of both young people well and saw in their performances something more than rivalry. He noted a connection that went beyond simple competition. He understood that both Emma and Luke carried the weight of enormous responsibilities for their age, and that, although each faced their pain differently, they were pushing each other to give their best. For him, the music they shared was not only a tool for expression, but also a way to heal. Yet, that healing aspect wasn't evident to them yet, as the tension between them continued to grow. One particular night, things reached a breaking point. After his performance, Luke stepped off the stage and, as he passed by Emma, muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "This isn't a game, you know. Some of us sing to survive." Emma, startled and a bit hurt by his words, felt a pang of sadness. It wasn't the first time Luke had made hurtful comments, but that night they stung more deeply. His words made her question if she was doing the right thing or if she was, without intending to, hurting someone else. Deep down, she knew her motives were pure, to help her grandfather. Yet she couldn't ignore the pain in Luke's voice or the contained anger in each of his songs. It reflected a burden he also bore, one she didn't fully understand, but made her feel a deep compassion. Despite the tension, Emma resolved not to be defeated by Luke's resentment. She knew she had to stay focused on her purpose, so she continued to perform with the same dedication each night, offering her music as an act of love and hope. But inside, each performance became an act of resilience, where every note was not only a tribute to her grandfather, but also a way to show that, despite adversity, she could maintain her integrity and determination. At the end of the night, Emma returned home exhausted, but with a strange inner peace. Despite Luke's words, she felt she was doing the right thing, that each song was one more step toward her goal. She couldn't foresee that, in time, this rivalry would lead her to face even greater challenges, or that this defiant, reserved boy would come to play a significant role in her life. For now, all she knew was that her struggle would continue, and as long as she had a voice, she would sing with all her heart for herself and her grandfather. That night, after another performance at the restaurant, Emma retreated to a corner to rest and observe the audience. From there, she watched people approach the tip jar, some leaving coins, others small notes with words of encouragement. Though she felt grateful for each gesture, Luke's distant and cold presence weighed on her mood. Each night he grew more reserved, almost hostile, and despite her efforts, she couldn't understand why. As she reflected on this, she noticed an older woman with grey hair and lively eyes watching her from a nearby table. The woman had been in the restaurant on other occasions, always sitting in the same spot, her expression calm but filled with untold stories. Tonight, however, she rose and approached Emma with a warm smile. "You're Mr. Harold's granddaughter, aren't you?" the woman asked softly, her voice immediately radiating an unexpected warmth. Emma nodded, surprised that the woman knew her. "Yes, ma'am. How do you know my name?" The woman smiled with a hint of melancholy, as if the question stirred distant memories. "My name is Ruth," she said, sitting beside Emma without waiting for an invitation. "I knew your parents years ago when they were just two young dreamers with a love for music." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Her parents were rarely mentioned at home. Her grandfather, though always loving and close, avoided talking about them. The little information she had about them came from blurred memories and a few photos hidden at the back of a drawer. "Did you really know them?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What can you tell me about them?" Ruth nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and nostalgia. "They were talented musicians, dreamers, full of passion. Your mother had a beautiful voice, soft like yours, but with remarkable strength. And your father, he was a guitarist brimming with life, someone who played with an intensity that could move anyone." Emma felt chills run down her spine. In an instant, shadows of her past began to take shape. Her parents' story had always been a mystery to her, a blank page that her grandfather never dared to complete. Yet, hearing Ruth's words, she felt these scattered fragments of memory starting to come together. "But why didn't I know any of this?" she asked, her voice heavy with emotion and confusion. "My grandfather barely talks about my parents, and he never explained what happened to them." Ruth looked at Emma with warmth and, after a pause, continued, "It's not easy to remember the past, dear, especially when it hurts." She paused briefly before revealing something Emma had never expected. "Your parents, just like you now, wanted to pursue music. They dreamed of building a career, of traveling and singing together. But it wasn't easy. They faced obstacles, and people who didn't always have the best intentions." Ruth's voice softened as she mentioned Victor, a man whose presence seemed to cast a troubling shadow over her family's past. Emma, bewildered, tried to grasp the weight of that name. "Victor," she repeated. "Who is he?" The old woman nodded, as though the name itself was enough to explain many things. "Victor was an ambitious businessman, someone who saw the potential in your parents and took advantage of their dreams. He convinced them they could be famous, that their lives would change if they worked with him. At first, he offered them what seemed like the perfect opportunity, But they soon realized he didn't have good intentions. Victor exploited them, and the pressure he placed on them eventually fractured their relationship and their peace. It was the beginning of their tragedy. Emma felt a surge of emotions as she listened. Victor appeared in her mind as a dark figure, a shadow that seemed to have marked her family's story with pain, even in his absence. Now she understood why Mr. Harold never spoke of her parents. There were wounds he preferred to leave in the past, hidden, for fear that the pain would break him again. Yet, for Emma, this discovery wasn't just a tragic story. It was a warning, a reminder of how vulnerable music could be in the wrong hands. "And my grandfather?" Emma asked, searching for answers. "Did he know about all this?" "Oh, yes." Ruth's voice turned somber. "Harold tried to protect your parents, to keep them from falling for Victor's promises. But they were young, and sometimes the desire to fulfill a dream blinds you to the dangers. When everything fell apart, Harold did what he could to protect you, Emma. He's carried that sorrow for all these years." Emma then understood why her grandfather had always been so protective and cautious, why he had taught her to love music, but also to respect it and remain humble. Her parents' story and Ruth's warning echoed in her heart, filling her with a blend of sadness and fascination for the family history she was only beginning to uncover. The figure of Victor, that shadow that had shattered her parents' dreams, became a presence she felt she should keep an eye on, even though she'd never met him. She wanted to learn more, to uncover the role Victor had played in her parents' lives and the impact he had left on her grandfather, who was now fighting for his life. This revelation made her reflect on her own situation and the sacrifice she was making for Mr. Harold. But it also stirred a strange fear. What would she do if she came face to face with Victor, if he offered her the same kind of opportunity he had given her parents? Emma looked at Ruth with gratitude, feeling that this woman had given her more than just words. She had provided her with the connection she had longed for with her parents and a veiled warning that the world of music could be as dark as it was beautiful. "Thank you, Ruth," she murmured, deeply moved. "I didn't realize how much I needed to hear this." The older woman smiled sweetly and patted her hand. "Take care of yourself, Emma. Music is a wonderful gift, but it can also be a burden if you don't find the right way to carry it. Your grandfather knows this well, and you, more than anyone, have the strength to keep your parents' legacy alive." That night, as she returned home, Emma couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with Ruth. Her parents' story, Mr. Harold's sacrifice, and the sinister figure of Victor all swirled in her mind, creating a whirlwind of emotions. Now, besides her desire to help her grandfather, she felt an urgent need to understand and protect her family legacy. From that moment, Emma knew her path was marked not only by love for her grandfather, but also by the strength of her parents and Mr. Harold's struggle to protect her. With her heart filled with new questions and a renewed determination, she promised herself she would keep singing, not just to save her grandfather, but also to honor the dreams and memory of her parents. The nights at Henry's restaurant continued, and Emma's voice became more familiar among the regulars. Little by little, the small venue began to draw more people eager to hear her, leaving coins as a show of support. Emma was grateful, feeling that each performance brought her closer to her goal of helping her grandfather. However, her parents' story, the revelation about Victor and his role in her family's past, continued to haunt her thoughts. One particularly cold night, the restaurant was more crowded than usual. Emma prepared to perform on the small stage, while Henry and the waiters hurried to serve the new faces in the crowd. Among a group of well-dressed men in the audience sat a man whose commanding presence and sharp gaze set him apart. It was Victor. Emma didn't recognize him immediately, but his presence didn't go unnoticed by Henry, who tensed up upon seeing the businessman enter. Victor was a well-known figure in the music world, someone who had built his fortune by promoting young talent and exploiting every opportunity for success. To him, Emma wasn't just a girl with extraordinary talent, she was a potential investment, a voice that, under his guidance, could mean profits and recognition. Emma's performance began, and as she sang, Victor watched her with a calculated interest. His eyes showed no admiration or warmth. It was more of an evaluation, a cold, professional assessment. Emma, unaware of his presence, sang with her usual passion, each note filled with love and hope. Her voice filled the room, moving those present and capturing Victor's attention, who began to see her as a promise, a gem waiting to be polished to shine even brighter. When her performance ended, Emma stepped off the stage to applause and words of encouragement from the crowd. As she collected her tips and prepared to leave, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning around, she met Victor's piercing gaze as he offered a calculated smile and handed her his business card. "Emma, right?" he said, in a soft, almost honeyed tone. "I've heard about you, and I must say, I'm impressed." Slightly surprised, Emma took the card and read his name. A feeling of unease washed over her as she remembered Ruth's words about the businessman who had ruined her parents' lives. But Victor, unaware of her reaction, continued speaking. "My name is Victor. I work in the music industry, and as you can imagine, I'm constantly looking for young talent," he said, keeping his smile steady. "You have something special, Emma, something the world needs to hear, something that deserves to reach bigger stages." Emma felt a mix of curiosity and caution. Victor continued, painting a picture that seemed like a dream come true. Big stages, professional recordings, trips to the city to sing for massive audiences. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, buried somewhere deep in her heart. But as she listened, the image of her grandfather, weak and in need of her help, crossed her mind, mingling that dream with a deep sense of unease. Noticing the hesitation in her eyes, Victor decided to play the card he knew would sway her. "I know your grandfather is going through a difficult time, Emma. I could help with that. I can cover his treatment expenses and make sure he gets the best care. All you have to do is accept my offer and come to the city with me. I'll give you the chance to become a star, and in return, you'll share that incredible talent you have with the world." Victor's offer was tempting, almost too good to be true. Her heart raced as she considered that this might be the way to save Mr. Harold without the uncertainty and effort of singing every night at the restaurant. But a nagging doubt crept in. Ruth's warnings and her grandfather's bitter mentions of Victor made her question his intentions. Could this businessman really be trusted? "It's an important decision, I know," Victor said, noticing her silence. "Take your time, but don't let time take this opportunity from you. Not everyone gets a second chance, and you, Emma, have a talent that shouldn't be confined to a place this small." With those words, Victor left a hook, knowing he had stirred in her the desire for a different life. He assured her they'd be in touch, and with a calculated smile, he left, leaving Emma in a cloud of confusing, conflicting thoughts. Emma stayed at the restaurant after everyone had left, holding Victor's card and replaying his words in her mind. The offer was enticing, a future of fame, the chance to help her grandfather without struggling night after night, the dream of singing on bigger stages. Yet, Ruth's warnings and the concerned look Henry had given her during the exchange still echoed in her thoughts. That night, when she got home, Emma shared Victor's proposal with her grandfather. Mr. Harold's reaction was immediate and filled with deep distrust. At the mere mention of Victor's name, his face tensed, his expression darkening as if the very memory brought a lingering pain. "Emma, that man is not someone you can trust," he said with a firm, weary voice. "Victor doesn't see people. He sees opportunities to make money. He once tried the same thing with your parents and nearly destroyed them." Mr. Harold shared fragments of his own experience with Victor, describing how he had tried to protect her parents from that ambitious man's control, and how, in their youth, they had fallen for his promises until the pressures destroyed their peace. According to her grandfather, Victor was not someone who cared about others' well-being, but someone who pursued profit at any cost. Emma was warned not to trust him. Her grandfather's warning was clear, yet the dilemma still weighed on Emma's heart. Victor's offer represented a chance to change everything, a life where her grandfather could get the treatment he needed, and she could fulfill her dreams of singing. But the fear of leaving Mr. Harold behind and betraying the trust he'd always placed in her filled her with doubt and guilt. That night, Emma lay awake, caught between the promise of a dream and the fear of falling into the same trap that had ensnared her parents. Her heart felt torn. She knew a decision was inevitable, and that whichever path she chose, her life would change forever. News of Victor's offer soon reached Luke, who heard the rumors at the restaurant. The idea that Emma might have the chance to sing on big stages, to achieve a dream he saw as unreachable, stirred a mix of envy and despair within him. Deep down, he couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment. Every night, he sang to survive, to scrape together enough money to support his mother, who was growing weaker and more fragile. Medical expenses and the need to care for his mother had forced Luke to abandon any dreams or idealism. Singing was a necessity, not a pleasure. Each performance at the restaurant was a desperate attempt to earn enough. Emma's arrival had already shaken the stability he had in the restaurant, and now, with Victor's offer, it felt as if all his efforts were crumbling. One evening, as Luke left the restaurant, he found Victor waiting for him near the entrance. The businessman's imposing figure and persuasive manner reminded him of the powerful men he'd seen in the city center, the kind who seemed able to change lives with a single word. Victor, with his calculated expression and smooth tone, didn't waste time approaching him, as if he had already planned their encounter. "Luke, right?" Victor asked, extending his hand. "I've heard your voice and your story. You seem to have as much talent as you have determination. I wonder, have you ever considered going beyond this small restaurant?" Luke didn't respond immediately, studying the businessman. He recalled Emma's warnings, her story about Victor's impact on her parents' lives, but the concern for his mother and the pressure he felt made it difficult to linger on those thoughts. Victor, as if sensing his hesitation, continued in a reassuring tone. "I know your situation is complicated and that you need support for your mother. Just like Emma, I'm willing to offer you a place in my company, access to bigger stages, and the chance to earn the money you need, and more." Luke felt a lump in his throat. The offer was everything he had hoped for in his moments of deepest despair, a chance to secure his mother's well-being without relying on restaurant tips. Yet something inside him felt uneasy. He looked at Victor, trying to gauge the sincerity of his words, but the need to help his mother outweighed any warning. "And what would I have to do?" he asked, his tone serious and cautious. Victor explained that, like Emma, he would need to move to the city, fully commit to his career, and leave the restaurant behind. Luke couldn't stop thinking about his mother, the long nights he had spent caring for her, and the fear of her condition worsening without the proper care. Victor seemed to read each of his thoughts and assured him that, by signing with him, he would be able to cover his mother's medical expenses and needs without worrying about anything else. Luke made his decision quickly, and though it was impulsive, it reflected the desperation he had carried for so long. Victor's offer was the only solution he'd had in ages, and even though Victor's connection to Emma raised doubts, the idea of seeing his mother recover and leaving behind financial worries was too compelling. That night, after signing the contract, Luke felt a mix of relief and emptiness. The next day, he would see Emma, but he knew he wouldn't be able to look her in the eyes without feeling the weight of a decision he knew she wouldn't approve of. At the same time, a gnawing anxiety clenched his stomach, but he tried to convince himself he had done the right thing, that any price was worth it if it meant his mother's recovery. When Emma learned of Luke's decision, she felt a pang of pain and betrayal she hadn't expected. All this time, she had believed that despite their differences, they shared something special, a bond of mutual respect and empathy. Yet now, he had chosen to align with Victor, ignoring her grandfather's warnings and her family's history. "How could you?" she asked him, her voice a mix of sadness and confusion when she found him at the restaurant. Luke looked at her with a defiant expression, though he was hurting inside. He didn't want to admit the guilt gnawing at him, the weight of the choice he had made. Avoiding her gaze, he replied coldly, "Not all of us have the luxury of choice, Emma. Some of us need to survive." Hearing this, Emma felt her heart break. The connection she had been building with Luke shattered in an instant, leaving a painful void. She knew he had his reasons for making this choice, but she couldn't help feeling betrayed. Luke had given in to the very man who had hurt her family, and while she understood his desperation, she couldn't reconcile with his decision. Victor's presence became a dividing shadow in Emma's life. He wasn't just separating her from her grandfather, he was also pulling her away from the only genuine friendship she had formed at the restaurant. As Luke prepared to leave, Emma felt loneliness surround her, trapping her between her worry for her grandfather and the sadness of losing her friend. Over time, Emma realized she couldn't make Luke change his mind. She had to focus on her own purpose, singing for Mr. Harold's well-being and staying true to the values he had taught her. Though Luke had drifted away, she knew she couldn't abandon her principles. As for Luke, he began to feel the weight of his decision each time Emma looked at him. Though he tried to keep up a cold front, guilt reminded him constantly that he had betrayed her trust. The contract with Victor, which had initially brought him relief, began to feel like a burden, a shadow hanging over him every time he thought of Emma and his mother, for whom he had made this choice. The distance between them grew, and though Emma was hurt, she moved forward with her resolve intact. She knew that, though she had lost Luke, she still had her grandfather and the memory of her family, and she resolved that, despite everything, she would continue singing with the same love and hope that had guided her all along. Days at Henry's restaurant became strange for Emma. Luke's absence left a void that the restaurant's noise and the new faces in the audience couldn't fill. The nights, once charged with a mix of rivalry and connection with him, now felt lonely and tense. Luke had left behind his performances, and with them a friendship that, though difficult, had meant a lot to her. But Emma couldn't afford to stop. Her grandfather still needed money for his treatment, and she had to keep her promise to fight for him. One particularly quiet night, Ruth approached Emma after her performance. The old woman watched her with the same tender look, but this time her expression carried a seriousness Emma hadn't seen before. Without preamble, Ruth asked Emma to join her outside the restaurant, away from the noise, to a small bench on the corner where they could speak privately. "Emma, I know you've been facing a difficult situation, and that Victor has tried to convince you to join his company," Ruth began, her voice soft but laced with concern. "There's something I believe you need to know. Something that may help you make a final decision." A chill ran down Emma's spine. There was something in Ruth's tone that hinted at an important revelation, something she hadn't dared ask but had always wanted to know. She took a deep breath, nodding for Ruth to continue. "Victor, as I've told you, was the one who manipulated your parents, and he tried to influence your grandfather as well. But what you don't yet know is how he did it, or the true extent of his control," Ruth explained, her eyes fixed on Emma's. "Victor didn't just offer opportunities. He trapped people, took over their dreams, and turned them into a prison." Ruth began to recount the details of how Victor had met her parents. At first, he had offered them a contract promising a bright future and opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise had. The promise of success had blinded them, especially her father, who dreamed of a music career and of providing a better life for his family. But over time, Victor began to control them, increasing his demands for performances and subjecting them to unbearable pressure. Little by little, the passion that had once united her parents became a burden. Your father, though talented, wasn't prepared for the pressure, and your mother, so devoted to him and to music, was eventually consumed by Victor's demands, Ruth explained, her voice trembling at the memory. What began as a dream became a nightmare. Their relationship deteriorated quickly. The distance, the demands, and the pressure destroyed the love that had brought them together. Emma listened to every word, feeling a mixture of sadness and anger. She couldn't help but imagine her parents, young and full of hope, caught under Victor's control, watching their love and dreams crumble under the weight of expectations and exploitation. It hurt to think that this man, who now tried to lure her, was responsible for her family's tragedy. "But why did my grandfather never tell me this?" Emma asked, a knot forming in her throat. Ruth sighed, looking into the distance as if her memories were taking shape before her. "Your grandfather tried to warn them. He wanted to protect them, but they, in their youth and idealism, didn't listen. When things became unbearable, your parents cut ties with Victor, and your grandfather devoted himself to taking care of you. Mr. Harold never told you about this because he thought that shielding you from this pain would allow you to grow freely, without the shadow of a dark past." Ruth's words filled Emma with indescribable sadness. She understood why her grandfather had avoided the subject, but learning it now, in this way, left a deep wound. The figure of Victor grew darker, more dangerous in her mind. He wasn't just an ambitious businessman. He was someone who had destroyed her parents and nearly ruined her grandfather's life. And now, without a hint of compassion, he was trying to repeat the same story with her. With tears welling in her eyes, Emma looked at Ruth, grateful for the truth, yet filled with fear and distrust toward the man threatening her dreams. "Ruth, thank you for telling me. Now I know I'll never accept Victor's offer. No matter how much money he promises, I won't betray what my parents and my grandfather taught me," Emma said, her voice steady but breaking with emotion. Ruth nodded with a look full of pride and compassion. She patted Emma's hand and reminded her that music was a gift to be protected, not something to be sold to the highest bidder. But as Emma resolved to turn away from Victor's offer, her worry for Luke continued to grow. She knew that in his desperation, he had accepted Victor's proposal, and she feared he might end up trapped in the same situation her parents had faced. Though her relationship with Luke had deteriorated, she still felt a deep bond with him, a connection she couldn't ignore. She remembered the moments he had opened his heart to her, sharing his fears and his mother's illness. She knew his decision hadn't been driven by ambition, but by necessity, and that filled her with sadness. Impulsed by her desire to protect Luke from Victor, Emma had been digging deeper, determined to find out more. She met with Ruth and Henry to uncover the experiences of other young musicians who had worked with Victor, gradually unraveling a dark pattern. Victor's history was littered with stories of young talents trapped in contracts that had initially seemed like paths to fame, but eventually turned into inescapable burdens. Under his control, many musicians saw their careers cut short and their dreams shattered. "How can I warn Luke without him taking it the wrong way?" Emma asked one night as she discussed her concerns with Ruth and Henry. Henry looked at her seriously. "Luke made that decision because he felt he had no other choice, Emma. You'll need to be patient and wait for the right moment to talk to him. Now that Victor has him in his grasp, it won't be easy for him to listen. But keep trying. If anyone can show him the truth, it's you." Emma's resolve grew, and each night, after her performance, she thought about how she might help Luke. Her worry grew with each passing day, knowing that every moment he spent under Victor's influence led him further down a path of exploitation and sacrifice. Meanwhile, Victor, noticing that Emma hadn't responded to his offer, decided to turn up the pressure. One evening after her performance, he approached her with a smooth smile, but his words carried a cold, calculated tone. "Emma, I've been patient with you, but I can't wait forever," he said, feigning a kind tone. "If you don't take this opportunity now, there won't be a second offer. Are you really willing to throw away your future?" Filled with the strength she'd gained from learning the truth about her parents, Emma looked him straight in the eye and replied without hesitation, "I'd rather build my future with my own voice than depend on someone like you." Victor's expression changed instantly. His smile vanished and his eyes turned cold, revealing a side Emma hadn't seen before. For the first time, she saw Victor's true face, the one her parents and grandfather had known. and she felt assured that she had made the right decision. Realizing he couldn't sway her, Victor left without another word, but his gaze held a veiled threat, a warning that he wouldn't give up easily. That night, Emma returned home feeling stronger and more resolved than ever. She knew the path she had chosen wouldn't be easy, but she preferred to face the hardship with integrity than to submit to someone who only saw her as a profit opportunity. Now, more than ever, she was determined to protect her music and her family legacy, refusing to be swayed by Victor's promises. At the same time, her decision weighed heavily as her concern for Luke grew, knowing he was under the control of the man who had ruined her family's dreams. However, Emma knew she couldn't save Luke unless he wanted it himself. So, with her heart filled with hope and renewed strength, she prepared to fight, not just for her grandfather, but also for her friend, waiting for the right moment to help him see the truth. Each night, Emma continued singing at Henry's restaurant, pouring her family's story, her grandfather's sacrifices, and her love for those she had lost into every note. In each song, she conveyed her passion and honesty, and little by little, the audience began to respond with genuine connection. Emma realized that her voice, simple as it was, had the power to touch people's hearts, and that more than any contract was her true path to freedom. Then, the news of Mr. Harold's declining health struck like lightning. That morning, while serving breakfast, her grandfather began to cough violently, his usually warm, serene face turning pale and drawn. Terrified, Emma called an ambulance, which arrived shortly after to take him to the hospital. The diagnosis was clear. His condition had worsened, and he would need surgery much sooner than expected. The time she had bought by singing each night seemed to be slipping away, and a sense of desperation started to creep into her heart. That afternoon, as she waited in the hospital's silent waiting room, Henry arrived to sit with her. Seeing the worry in her eyes, he reminded her that she was stronger than she thought, and that this strength would help her face the situation. But Emma felt as if all her efforts had been in vain, and the weight of uncertainty made her fear she might lose her grandfather. As hours passed in the silent waiting room, Emma thought of Mr. Harold's sacrifices, his enduring love, and his words of caution about the world of music. She felt time slipping away and a pang of despair at the thought that maybe, for her grandfather's sake, she should have accepted Victor's offer, setting aside her principles. But recalling her parents' story and the harm Victor had caused her family, she reaffirmed her decision. She would rather fight for her grandfather with integrity than sell herself to someone who saw her only as a business opportunity. In the midst of her reflection, she heard a familiar voice by her side. It was Luke, standing at the entrance of the waiting room with a tense and remorseful expression. He had heard about Mr. Harold's condition from Henry and felt indebted for not having been there sooner. His usual defiant look was now replaced with humility, almost regret, and his eyes shone with sincere concern. "Emma," he murmured, unsure how to begin. She looked at him with surprise, though there was a wall of pain between them, built by the distance and hurt. "I'm sorry about your grandfather. I didn't know he was this unwell." Emma, though grateful for his presence, couldn't help the bitterness in her voice. "Luke, you were the one who chose to leave. When I needed a friend the most, you went with Victor. And now," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "why are you here?" Luke lowered his gaze, ashamed, feeling the weight of his decisions and the betrayal he had committed. "You don't understand, Emma. I accepted Victor's offer because I felt I had no other option. My mum, her health is getting worse, and the money I earned at the restaurant wasn't enough. I had to find a way to help her, and Victor offered me that. I thought I could handle it, that it wouldn't affect me, but I was wrong." Emma looked at him more closely and noticed the exhaustion on his face, the guilt surrounding him. For the first time, she saw Luke as someone just as vulnerable as herself, trapped between desperation and the sacrifices he made for his loved ones. The differences between them seemed to dissolve, and the wall that had separated them began to crumble. "Victor trapped you," Emma murmured, with a mix of sadness and understanding. "His offer always seems like the only way out. And then he turns you into his prisoner." Luke nodded, realizing he couldn't keep running from the truth. He had signed a contract that bound him to exhausting schedules, endless commitments, and empty promises. At first, Victor had been kind, assuring him that success was just around the corner, but soon the situation changed. Each performance became a burden, and any attempt to question Victor's demands was met with cold indifference. Luke had begun to see Victor's true face, and now his desire to help his mother had become an unbearable weight. "I made a mistake, Emma. I thought it was the only way to help my mom, but I can't stay with Victor. I want out, but I don't know how." Luke lowered his head, filled with a mix of shame and regret. Hearing this, Emma's heart filled with compassion. She understood that Luke had acted under desperate pressure and was now paying a high price. Her own experiences and her family's story had made her strong, but she saw that Luke, too, had been forced down a difficult path. "Luke, I've wanted to give up so many times too, and I felt tempted to accept Victor's offer. But now I know I can't betray what my grandfather and parents taught me." She took his hand, offering silent comfort. "Victor only knows how to manipulate. He doesn't care about dreams, only what he can gain. We can't let him control our lives." At that moment, Luke felt a spark of hope reignite within him. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. Emma was there, supporting him, understanding his struggles, reminding him he could still fight for his mother without losing himself. "Thank you, Emma," Luke murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. "I don't deserve your help, but I promise I'll do everything I can to get out of this situation." The two sat in silence, feeling that reconciliation needed no more words. They understood that, though their paths had been different, they shared the same goal: to protect the ones they loved without betraying their values. Their friendship, once fractured, mended in that moment of vulnerability and mutual understanding. With this newfound strength, they decided to confront Victor together. They knew the risks, but their mutual support gave them the courage they needed. The next morning, Henry and Ruth, who had followed their story from the beginning, offered to help. Ruth, with her experience in the music industry, began investigating Luke's contract and found legal loopholes that might allow him to break free from his commitments. The following days were difficult and full of tension, but the unity between Emma and Luke, along with the support of Henry and Ruth, kept them strong. Meanwhile, Emma continued to sing at the restaurant, and the community, aware of Mr. Harold's situation, began to contribute with donations and words of encouragement. Henry organized a collection and raised a significant amount for Mr. Harold's surgery, a generous act that deeply moved Emma and restored her hope. Finally, one night, Luke confronted Victor. With Ruth's help and the strength Emma had given him, he renounced his contract. Victor, realizing he was losing control, reacted with anger and threats, but Luke, armed with the truth and the support of his friends, stood firm. The separation wasn't easy, and Victor's retaliation left a bitter taste, but he finally escaped Victor's influence. The reconciliation between Luke and Emma marked a new beginning for both of them. The sacrifices they had made and the tough decisions they'd taken now united them more deeply. Each night, they performed together at the restaurant, sharing the stage and the purpose of fighting for their loved ones without losing their integrity. The rivalry that had once divided them became a bond of solidarity and friendship that strengthened them. Thanks to everyone's efforts, the money for Mr. Harold's surgery was finally raised and the operation was a success. Mr. Harold began his recovery, surrounded by Emma's love and the friends who had made his treatment possible. For Emma, this experience was more than a victory. It was a reminder of the importance of fighting for the values she had inherited and protecting the freedom her grandfather and parents had taught her. Luke also succeeded in getting his mother the treatment she needed, and her health began to improve. Their determination had inspired the community, and Henry's restaurant became a symbol of hope and solidarity, a place where people could come together and remember that dreams could be achieved without sacrificing dignity. In this new phase, Emma and Luke continued to share their music, knowing that in every song, in every note, they carried the legacy of their families and the strength of those who had fought by their side. The bond that had formed between them was now a solid friendship, an unbreakable alliance forged in the face of hardship and resilience. On that stage, under the warm lights of the restaurant, they sang each night, not just for their own dreams, but for those, like them, who sought a place in the world without forsaking their values. Their reconciliation had healed wounds and created a new path filled with possibilities and hope. News of Mr. Harold's recovery and Luke's mother's improved health brought immense relief to Emma and her friend. Both felt that their efforts, the nights of uncertainty and the constant struggle, had borne fruit. Yet despite this victory, they both still faced financial difficulties. They needed a steady income, and Henry, ever observant, came up with an idea that would change their lives: to organize a grand performance at the restaurant, an event that would draw the whole community and raise enough funds to support their families in this new phase. The idea thrilled Emma and Luke. They decided to give their all to every detail of the event, and for days, the restaurant bustled with preparations. Henry, who took charge of inviting friends and spreading the word, attracted a diverse and broad audience, from regular patrons to newcomers from the city, intrigued by the story of the two young musicians. The event promised to be unforgettable, and the restaurant, with its soft lighting and special decor, transformed into the perfect setting for an evening filled with music and emotion. The night of the big performance, the restaurant filled up long before the show started. The atmosphere was electric, and you could feel the anticipation of the audience, who knew Emma and Luke's story and had come not only for the music, but to show support for two young people who had demonstrated courage and perseverance. Emma and Luke, waiting backstage, felt nervous but excited, knowing that this night was more than just a performance. It was the closing of a chapter, a tribute to their families, their sacrifices, and the friendship they had built. At 9 o'clock sharp, the restaurant lights dimmed, and Henry, with a proud smile, took the stage to introduce the night's stars. "Dear friends, thank you for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate the talent and courage of two young people who have shown us the value of fighting for our loved ones and not giving up, even in the most difficult circumstances. Please give a big round of applause for Emma and Luke." The applause was deafening. Emma and Luke took the stage hand in hand, greeting the audience with nervous but grateful smiles. Luke, with his guitar, positioned himself beside Emma, and they exchanged a look of solidarity that spoke of everything they had been through. The first song began, and Emma's voice rose, soft and captivating, filling the space with a unique energy. The audience was completely absorbed in every note, every verse, and it quickly became clear that what was happening at the restaurant was more than just music. It was a profound connection between the artists and their audience. Luke's energetic, passionate guitar playing perfectly complemented Emma's sweetness and emotion, creating a harmony that reflected their personalities and the journey that had brought them together. Song after song, the restaurant buzzed with applause and emotions. The attendees, deeply moved, continued to show their appreciation for the two young musicians. Many of them had been involved in their lives since they began performing at the restaurant, and seeing them shine on this special night filled each person there with pride. However, at the height of the performance, something unexpected happened. A sudden blackout plunged the restaurant into darkness. Murmurs of surprise and confusion filled the room as the lights flickered without turning back on. Henry, who had arranged for an emergency generator, tried to start it, but it failed. Whispers grew louder, and some attendees seemed ready to leave, thinking the performance had ended abruptly. But then, in a moment of determination, Emma took a deep breath and began to sing a cappella. Her voice, without a microphone or accompaniment, rang out in the darkness, clear and powerful. The audience fell silent, captivated by the purity and intensity of her performance. Luke, inspired by her bravery, quickly joined her, playing his guitar softly, and together they filled the entire space with an intimate, emotional atmosphere. Each note was a testament to their resilience, love, and struggle, and their performance resonated in every corner of the restaurant. In the darkness, Emma and Luke's music took on a new meaning. It was no longer just a performance, it was a statement of their identity, the strength that united them, and their determination to overcome any obstacle. Deeply moved, the audience began to clap in the middle of the song, and many in attendance, visibly emotional, pulled out their phones and turned on their flashlights, illuminating the stage with tiny lights that shone like stars in the dim room. When the song ended, the restaurant erupted into thunderous applause. Emma and Luke, visibly moved, embraced on stage, feeling they had connected with their audience on a level deeper than they had ever imagined. The crowd, having witnessed the magic of that moment, responded generously. People approached the stage, leaving generous donations, moved by the improvised show and the young musicians' genuine effort. In the midst of the applause and donations, something unexpected happened. Victor, who was in the audience, seized the moment to approach Emma and Luke. With a calculated smile and a falsely admiring tone, he tried once again to lure them with his proposal. "Impressive, you two. Come here, Emma, Luke," Victor said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't fully mask his intent. "What you have is an invaluable talent. Imagine what you could achieve with me in the city on much bigger stages than this little restaurant. With my support, you could go so much further. Tonight is just the beginning of something bigger." Emma and Luke looked at him, but before they could respond, Ruth rose from the crowd and, with a firm voice, began exposing Victor's dark past. She shared how he had manipulated and exploited young talent, including Emma's parents, trapping them in abusive contracts and destroying their dreams. Her courage inspired others in the audience to speak up, and the crowd began murmuring with disapproval, questioning Victor and his integrity. Surrounded by disapproving glances and critical voices, Victor tried to defend himself, but the stories and testimonies from those present revealed the truth. The community, which until then had not known the full extent of Victor's harmful influence on so many lives, now saw him in a different light. The truth about his past was laid bare, and humiliated, Victor left the restaurant, realizing he no longer had control over Emma or Luke. With Victor out of their lives, Emma and Luke felt a renewed sense of peace. The grand performance had been more than just a show. It was closure, a way to free themselves from the shadows of the past and the chains that had threatened to crush their dreams. That night, surrounded by their community and those who truly supported them, they felt they had gained something far more valuable than fame: their freedom. The event was a resounding success. The donations were even more generous than expected, and by the end of the night, Henry informed them that they had raised more than enough to support their families for the foreseeable future. The restaurant, filled with applause, laughter, and a spirit of solidarity, became a symbol of the struggle and unity that the two young people had inspired in everyone present. Emma and Luke closed the night with a final song, a thank you to their community and to everyone who had believed in them. The performance became a moment of release, a tribute to their loved ones, and a celebration of friendship and courage. Each note was a testament that true dreams don't need exploitative contracts or empty promises. They can grow in the humblest of places and flourish in honesty and solidarity. As the night ended, Emma and Luke embraced, realizing that this performance had marked a new beginning. It didn't matter to them if they ever reached bigger stages, because they already had what they truly sought: an honest life, an unbreakable bond, and the certainty that, together, they could face any challenge. In the days following the big event, Emma and Luke enjoyed a sense of peace. The performance had not only raised the funds needed for their families, but had also strengthened the community bonds and provided final closure to the shadows Victor had tried to cast over their lives. Mr. Harold was recovering steadily, and during each hospital visit, Emma shared with him how her voice, the gift he had nurtured in her, had allowed them to overcome every difficulty. Luke, on his part, found comfort in his mother's improving health, her strength returning thanks to the donations and his unwavering efforts. As the days passed, Emma and Luke returned to performing at the restaurant, but now without the pressure of competition or the weight of necessity. Their performances had transformed into celebrations, tributes to their loved ones, and reminders of everything they had overcome together. Music was still their refuge, but now it was also a symbol of the freedom they had gained by rejecting Victor's empty promises. Henry's restaurant became an emblematic place for the community, a space where music echoed with stories of struggle and victory. Emma and Luke became inspiring figures, young people who not only refused to sell their dreams, but who also fought for them with integrity and courage. Each time they sang, it reminded everyone that true dreams aren't for sale. They're built, protected, and lived with authenticity. With each performance, Emma felt she was honoring her parents' memory and her grandfather's sacrifice. And by her side, Luke shared that same purpose, having become a dear friend and life companion. In each song, they knew they were preserving a family legacy and sharing a valuable lesson with their listeners. True greatness isn't found on the biggest stages, but in staying true to oneself. So, under the warm lights of the restaurant and surrounded by a supportive community, Emma and Luke continued singing, not only for their families, but for all those, like them, who fought each day to carve their own path. And so we reach the end of this incredible story. Thank you for joining us on this journey filled with emotions, resilience, and dreams built with courage and heart. We hope Emma and Luke's story has inspired you to pursue your dreams without giving up and reminded you that true greatness lies in staying true to yourself and those you love. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. Share this final chapter with someone who needs a dose of inspiration and hope. See you in the next video, where together we'll continue discovering stories that touch our hearts. Until next time, and may music always fill your life.